People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A First Time for Everything. I am your host, Juliet Rose. I am also an author, publisher, editor, and podcast host. Tonight we are talking to Alison McBain, who has quite an interesting, I guess, kind of like history or backstory. I was reading your bio a little bit, and it's pretty fascinating. So why don't you introduce yourself to everybody and let them know what you write.
I actually write a bit of everything. I write in all genres, and I write everything from novels to short stories to poetry. Like you, I wear a lot of hats. So I am also a publisher of a magazine, an online magazine. I also do editing. I also do ghostwriting. So basically, any given day, it's something creative, which is a lot of fun.
That's really cool. And do you have like a website or anything like that where you sell your books, or are you wide with your book sales?
Yeah, my books can be found in most places that books are sold. I also have a website, which is just my name, AlisonMcBain.com. I always emphasize Alison with one L. And you'll find me.
Very cool. Very cool. So at this point, how many books do you have out? And you can include like if you're in anthologies, things like that. Really, what's your catalog look like?
That's a good question. I don't know. I have four books that are just published solely under my own name. I've edited over a dozen books. I've ghostwritten over 24 books. So there's a lot of words in my past.
That is a lot. So I'm actually really curious about ghostwriting. So, I think most people understand in general what a ghostwriter is, but can you explain a little bit what that process looks like, and really how you go about doing that?
Yeah, definitely. So ghostwriting is one of those things that if people know about it, they usually think of a ghostwritten nonfiction book. So like, Prince Harry had a ghostwriter, right? But I do fiction. I actually ghostwrite fiction, which is a completely different endeavor pretty much. So a lot of times if an author's under contract with a publisher and for some reason can't deliver a book, they might hire someone like me. They might hire a ghostwriter. Or if an author has completed sort of a short first draft of a book, but it needs expansion, they might again hire a ghostwriter like me to help them fill it out. It's more than editing. A lot of times, but a lot of times is working in collaboration either with an author or a publisher to produce something specific that they need by a certain deadline.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when you ghostwrite for somebody, is this something that you add to your catalog as well, or are you literally kind of invisible behind the scenes?
I am invisible behind the scenes. Yeah, my name appears nowhere on it.
Interesting. Not even in like the acknowledgments or anything. You're just nowhere.
It might, honestly, I do for most of my clients, I do sign NDAs. So a lot of times I hand over the work and that's it.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you find as a writer that that's frustrating at times, or do you really enjoy that process?
I do enjoy that process. I enjoy working with other writers. I enjoy exploring new worlds. And sometimes it completely opens my mind to something that I never thought of before. Some projects I've taken on specifically because they challenge me. And that can be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So if you compared writing, say, ghostwriting for somebody else and writing for yourself, what would you say are the similarities and what would you say really are the differences?
Um, Depending on the client. So some clients need something very specific. So it's really coloring within the lines, I should say. So you don't, you have the general outline, you know exactly where you have to go, sometimes down to the specific characters. So it's much more regimented in that way, in terms of what I can add to the story that is my own. And a lot of times it has to be in a particular voice. So if there's an established author that I'm writing for, it has to match, what they've written before. So yeah, it can be, again, it's driving down that racetrack. You have one turn to do and you're done, right? Whereas writing for myself is more like, the open road. I
Right.
have I can choose where I wanna go, I can choose, and sometimes that can also be limiting, there might be too much choice,
Right.
whereas it can be fun to sort of be like, "Okay, this is exactly what someone's telling me what to do, I can do it, great."
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I've been kind of like researching a little bit more on ghostwriting and when people do it. And, it is interesting because I actually saw some recently and I didn't see the whole situation. So I don't know the author, but I know somebody was saying, oh, well, this person used a ghostwriter. They should say who they use. And I kind of thought about that in that conundrum kind of state, which is why no, it's called a ghostwriter for a reason. But if that person was to go on and say win awards, or is that any kind of issue, I guess, in the sense of like ethics? But really, where do you stand on that?
Again, I'm not taking the journey with the work after it leaves my hands. So, if it did happen to win awards, I could see that being an ethical concern for maybe the publisher or the author whose name is on the book. But it's not something that I've ever had to really consider or worry about. Yeah, mostly the books that I have worked on again fit a very specific function, to sort of, serve as a standing in for an author's catalog if for some reason that they cannot do a book themselves. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I don't think that probably has come up.
Yeah. And so like you mentioned before, a lot of people use ghostwriters in the sense of nonfiction. So writing for fiction is slightly different because in nonfiction, obviously maybe somebody doesn't have the skill set, but they have a story. Maybe they went through
Mhm.
something. I'm actually currently reading Nobody's Girl. Uh, and she used a ghostwriter in that, and it was a nonfiction story. And that made sense to me because obviously sometimes people have a story that they've been through something or story to tell, but they don't really have the skills as a writer. What would be a reason that somebody would use you for fiction?
Again, if there's some reason that they can't fulfill a contract, so for example, someone
Yeah,
gets sick, or the unfortunate circumstance, I've known other ghostwriters who have filled in if someone has passed away, and
sure.
the story is like maybe half finished, and in that case, sometimes the ghostwriter does get credit for finishing that work. It's usually written by so and so and so and so,
Sure.
but at the same time, yeah, there are definitely reasons why people hire ghostwriters for fiction, that are completely, legitimate. They're not just out there to say, okay, I'm going to write this author's coattails and never produce a word of my own. No, usually they either have a catalog of work beforehand or they're working with the ghostwriter in order to produce something, just like nonfiction.
Yeah, that's really interesting. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your work. So outside of writing for ghostwriting, The Rose Queen, I assume, is your first of your own
Yep.
work that you've done. And when did that come out?
That came out in 2018, and it's the first of a trilogy. I'm still working on the sequel.
Okay.
But I've had a few books published in the meantime.
Very cool. And so I guess going back, and this is one of my first questions that I always ask, is did you always know you wanted to be a writer? And at what point did you kind of know that? Was it like, you were in high school and you wrote something and said, I want to do this, or was it later in life?
It was actually earlier in life when I was 4.
Oh, nice.
Apparently, I wrote my first story, according to family lore. And it was a horror story about the monster in the closet, you know, illustrated, written, and published by me. You know, a few pages stapled together. But I always knew learned, ever since I learned how to read and found the magic of storytelling that just transported you to other worlds. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be a writer. I did take a few detours along the way. You know, life happens.
Yeah.
Had some kids, had a family, and then got back to it. It's something that's always been in the back of my head. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing.
Oh, that's really interesting. So obviously you knew at a very young age, and then your first book came out in 2018. In the time between when your first book came out and when you obviously started to think you wanted to be a writer, were you on a writing path? I know a lot of people would be like, well, no, I ended up going to school to be a chef, or, so did you detour off in the sense of like looking at a different career and then coming back to it, or did you always dabble?
I A little bit of both. So I did always write. It was sort of the constant of my life. I didn't always write for publication. So there was a time where, your parents say, well, it's nice you want to be a writer. What's going to pay the rent? So I did go to school, and I was planning on being a teacher, actually. So I was on that track. I was like, okay, I'll get my PhD. I love history. I like to put a lot of history into my work when I can, and I'll be a teacher. I'll have my summers off. I'll write books in the summer. That was my grand plan way back when I was a teenager and going to college. And then I feel like I did get a bit derailed. I did have some life experiences, and it was always something in the back of my head. You're going to come back to this. It's always your fallback. This is always something that you're going to do. And I kept on writing. I wrote lots of poetry. I started, but did not complete, a number of book drafts. And The Rose Queen was actually the first book I'd ever completed all the way to the end. And that is, of course, the one that got published.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I think we all have that. I mean, I remember being in like junior high school with my backpack and always had a manuscript in there. Like you always had like something.
Exactly.
But yeah, I didn't actually publish my first book until I was in my mid-30s. And I did write like newspapers, magazines, I did journalistic stuff. But my first book, that actually got published, so I had plenty of started manuscripts. Who knows what happened to those? But it is interesting how we always kind of cycle back to that. Did you ever have you always written fiction, or did you do nonfiction? Did you kind of do other things? I know you write poetry as well, but did you ever kind of go the other route just to keep writing?
I have written nonfiction. I've written essays, small memoir pieces, but I've never felt the need to really write nonfiction in length. Mainly because I feel that my life is very boring. So, I mean, maybe it hasn't been. I've lived in a lot of places. I've lived in California, New York City, Boston. So I've lived in some interesting places. I've met some very interesting people, but there's people who have more interesting stories. That's why I make things up.
Yeah.
Fiction, you can have much more exciting things happening in fiction, I feel, than in nonfiction.
Totally. And I agree. I also like that you can create the outcome in fiction. We're like in nonfiction, it is just what happened. So tell me a little bit about the premise of The Rose Queen, and like what was your inspiration for, like what kind of made you finish that one?
It was done out of love. And basically it's a fairy tale that I love very much. Is Beauty and the Beast, my favorite. But to me, fairy tales are wonderful. They're wonderful bases for stories, but they're incomplete. They're unrealistic. They're there to teach a lesson, essentially, a moral lesson. So I wanted to make it realistic, and I wanted to sort of flip it on its head. I didn't want to follow the well-trod path. So what I did is I flipped the genders. So the beast actually is a woman.
I like that.
So it changed a lot of the narrative around what this curse meant and how she dealt with it. Because, if you think of the normal tale, like, it's a guy, he's, he is really mean to an old woman, and got cursed, and so he has to find his humanity. He has to reconnect with a woman. He has to fall in love. So like there were some elements of that in the story, but again, it is told from a very different perspective.
What's interesting is like, flipping the genders. It makes me think that like, when I read Beauty and the Beast when I was a child at first, it always kind of shows a woman's ability to see past the physical and that type of stuff. Did you approach it the same way? Or did you actually kind of stay more realistic in that it's a little bit harder on that flipped role?
I did make it harder, for sure. And essentially I also changed the focus of it. So in my book, it's not about necessarily looking past physical appearances. It's about her learning to sort of accept herself. Because she's a beast, she's under a curse, she thinks she's going to die, so she has to accept that. She has to figure out how to accept that and how to use it to spread more good in the world, how to make sure that her life is not meaningless, if this curse actually comes to pass and she does end up perishing under the curse. So she manages to figure out ways to really influence the people around her and really make an impact, even with this curse taking place.
What would you say when you were writing this? What was your intent, or what did you hope that a reader would take away from that?
I wanted people to sort of re-examine things that we take for granted, I think. And so, Beauty and the Beast is a well-known fairy tale. I think flipping the script on that really makes people examine, well, what do these fairy tales really mean? And what are they trying to say? And what does that mean to a more modern audience? And so I was hoping that would be the takeaway. A lot of people just enjoyed it for the story itself, which is great. And the sequel delves deeper into that and sort of completes the fairy tale, I would say.
Yeah. I really like that concept, because I think that a lot of times people do retellings, but the retelling is kind of following the same kind of pattern and intent of the story, where it sounds like you took this and you were really switching it around to challenge. I mean, I'm sure to challenge yourself too, but also to challenge the reader to think differently.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That's really, really brilliant. And so you said you're writing the sequel.
Mm-hmm.
You said this is a trilogy?
It's a trilogy. So the first two books follow the fairy tale. So at the end of The Rose Queen, the fairy tale is not complete. And she has found sort of a happy ending, but not quite the end of the tale. So it continues in the second book, and it gets much more realistic. The second book is called The Rose War, because it shows more of the political aspects of the situation she has found herself in. And again, it's based very much on periods of history, specifically 16th century France. Although it is a completely fictional tale, and it's not set in France at all. It's set in an alternate world, but it has a lot of interesting comparisons for students of history.
So when you first put this out, obviously this was your first book that you put out, that you completed and put out. What was the reception, and what were some things you could look back on and say, maybe I wish I'd done differently? Or, do you have anything like that where you learned from putting that out that maybe you've helped kind of grow as a writer?
Oh, for sure. I would say we're always growing and learning new things as writers. And even from such a short period of time ago, I have learned so much in that time. I think that one thing, again, I work with a lot of authors. One thing that I did myself was I did want, as soon as I finished the book, I was like, okay, I'm ready for publication right now. And I wasn't, I did not probably market my book as much as I probably should have. I had no idea of the award landscape for books. And so I did have a number of very dedicated readers who enjoyed it, but it probably didn't make as big a splash as it could have. And I learned, after my second book, third book, etc. I learned more about how to launch a book, how to be involved as an author, and how to really reach my readers. And so, the first book, was wonderful. I love my first book. I definitely have a place in my heart for it, but at the same time, I feel much more like, I've crossed over that road. I put my first book out, and now I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. One thing that I heard a writer say one time, and it was something that I've always kind of thought about, is they said, once you put that out there, no matter what, don't go back and tweak it or change it or whatever.
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you agree with that?
I definitely do.
Yeah.
I normally don't reread my work. I don't know about you. Do you ever go back and say,
Nope.
"Oh, I have to read"?
Once
No,
I'm done
no.
editing, I'm like, it's done. It's out there. Sink or swim, it belongs to the world.
Exactly. It does, because you want to look forward. You want to look to the next project. You want to look to the next book. And we're constantly evolving as writers. I mean, any creatives do. Like, you look at famous artists and, like Picasso, this was his blue period. This was his, so same with writers. You start out in a certain place and you evolve as you get older, know more, have different experiences, and you put that into your work, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You add extra color to every single book that you write.
Yeah. So here's one of the questions, because you are writing this as a trilogy, and kind of the challenge that. So that's your first book and you've moved on. Do you ever, when you're writing the second one, or you're thinking about that, because you have these things where you're like, well, maybe I would have done this differently. How does that impact writing a second book after your first book, if you have maybe not doubts, but things that you would have done differently with that first book?
Well, honestly, this is why the sequel has been taking a while. And I did publish other books in the meantime, and wrote other books as a ghostwriter. So there's been a lot of water under the bridge between my first book and the second book that I'm working on. It is very difficult, I would say, to recapture that voice, to recapture that character. Which is probably why I'm taking so long on the second one. Because you feel like you're a different person, even after a couple years down the road. You feel like you're a different writer. And so it's sometimes hard to go back. Thank goodness I do have a bit of the ghostwriting background. So I'm like, okay, I'm just pretending I'm a different author writing for someone else.
You're ghostwriting for the old you.
I'm ghostwriting for the old Alison. So that helps. That helps if I put that into my mindset and look at it as a work that I'm, has very narrow parameters. But yeah, I'm taking my time with it, just because I can, and because I think the story deserves it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because my book Do Over, which it's not my first book technically. I wrote a book back in like the mid-2000s, but it's out of publication. But this was my first book when I came back to it. And I thought it was a standalone. So I wrote it, put it away, walked away. And then a character started talking to me. And so how I deal with, because same thing, like there's things that I probably would have done differently, was I did each one from a different character's perspective, so that it wasn't like, oh, wait a second, the flow went off a little bit. You had it this way, but then yes, maturity came in and experience came in. And so that helped me deal with that aspect, because I was concerned that if I try to do it, and it had been a certain amount of years, things have changed, I've changed, I've become a better writer, I believe, because of that experience. So that helps me do that, so I didn't kind of create a stagnant flow. How do you deal with the flow issue if you feel like you're a better writer now, and you wrote this, and now you're writing the next one? How do you make it so that if a reader was to say, read it out of order, and they would read your last book first, then went back and, oh, I didn't know there was another one, and read it? How do you kind of address that so that they get the same, quality or the same feeling from each of your books?
Essentially, I've taken the voice of the first one and just continued it. So I want it to stay in the same voice, even if I made mistakes in the writing style. So I am going to keep it in the same sort of tone. And it's something that a lot of readers really enjoyed. The Rose Queen is actually a YA book. And so keeping that same sort of YA tone, characterization, the character can't all of a sudden sound too mature, because then you'll lose the readers from the first book.
Right.
So just keeping it with that same sort of mentality and voice of the character is all important to me. So that's what I'm doing. It doesn't matter if if I've matured as a writer, my character will stay the same.
Yes. And that's fair. Yes. Well, I was reading your bio a little bit on your website and kind of like your history. And one of the things that intrigued me is your mother is Japanese American.
Mhm.
So, how do you feel like culture plays into your writing? Do you weave it in when you're doing that? Do you take aspects of your own life and create characters based around that?
Um, I definitely do. Not for the Rose Queen, but for a number of my shorter works. I've written some stories that are loosely based on my family's history, and some nonfiction pieces about my family, and what it was like growing up half Japanese. So when I was first starting out, I was like, no one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear about me or my family. And I found that it's actually the opposite. People are interested. People are interested in the period of time that was very resonant with my family. So, for example, my grandparents were interned in the camps, and that was actually where they met and married. So they fell in love in the camps, which is a story that I will someday write because it's again much more interesting than my own story. But yeah, it was an uh amazing might be the wrong word. It was a very tumultuous time, I think, in history, and it sort of sparked my own love of history growing up hearing about these stories from my family. So I think it had a huge influence on my life, even if I'm not directly talking about being half Japanese. It has definitely influenced the focus of my writing very, very deeply.
Yeah, well, I noticed. I think I read within that bio too that you're just really, feel very strongly about including diversity and building that into your stories as well. And I think you definitely have, a history to be able to talk about that. I mean, your grandparents' story is both tragic that they went through that, but also beautiful that they met each other through that. But like, yeah, it's still really tragic what they went through. And I think that's important in any way to weave into stories. I write fiction, but I have life experiences I take and fictionalize and weave into a story. Do you, when you're writing that, obviously not using your exact kind of grandparent story, but like that emotion or that reality, do you use that a lot in your writing as well?
Oh, definitely. I feel like if you ask most authors, they might say, "Oh no, it's completely fiction." I'm the opposite. I'm like, "Oh yeah, there's a piece of me in everything I write." So even if, as I said, even if it's not directly related to my heritage, it might be an experience that sparked it. It might be something that happened to me way back in college, or I like to put little tidbits because it makes it more real. It makes, as you said, the emotions more real if it's something that I myself have experienced or felt at some point in my life. So I feel that's where you get the very authentic writing. And again, something from my perspective, I write fantasy a lot. I write science fiction. Again, I've never traveled on a spaceship or ridden a dragon, but it can feel authentic if I put a little bit of me in each story.
Absolutely. Yeah. It creates those layers. I think goes beyond, just writing a story about, Bob and Jane, and all of a sudden you're creating actual realities that go into there and people feel that. Like they go, oh, well, like I remember one time I was criticized for not criticized, but like someone said, oh, well, you obviously did this. And so you wrote that in your book. Well, no, I didn't, but I did use experiences or my feelings about that specific situation because I did have feelings about the real life scenario and I weaved it into that. But no, I didn't actually. It was about being a wildland firefighter. I've never fought in fire except for in my own kitchen, So, but I'm saying, like, I think that it does add that authenticity when you're able to take your own experiences and feelings and thoughts and weave them into a fictionalized story, even if it isn't exactly what happened. You're still putting that. I don't know. It's a vibe behind it, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're also a poet, correct?
Yep. Yeah, I really enjoy poetry because it can sort of fit into those spaces in between working on big projects. It's a very, very little project that I
And
can
do you
work
feel
on.
like you're also a storyteller when you're writing poetry?
At times, I feel like books and short stories, they do tell a story. They can have a narrative, they have an arc. Poetry to me can be more like a snapshot. It can show a bigger story, but a lot of times a lot is left out of the off the page. So it can just give you a glimpse and then you have to fill in the rest. And so it's almost like a puzzle, which is one reason why I love it so much. It can really illuminate emotions without necessarily needing the whole story behind it. So it can connect with a lot of people that way.
Yeah. A lot of times I will read somebody's book and then I can tell that they're a poet too, like in the way that they write their fiction novel, they're still bringing in poetry in their descriptions or in their flow. Do you find that similarity? Like, do you kind of feel a little bit like you're a poet when you're also writing fiction?
Oh, definitely. It definitely helps with the description and also I would say the economy of words at times because I like to say there are two types of writers. There are the overwriters, the ones who write, 500 pages and have to cut 200.
Yes.
And then there's the underwriters, the ones who write too little and have to flesh it out. And so I'm definitely the second category.
Yeah.
I write too little and then I have to add more. And a lot of times it has to have a musicality to the writing. It has to be vivid. It has to evoke that photograph quality that I mentioned in poetry. I like to see the story happening, sort of like a movie. I don't know about you. Is that how you write too, or?
It is. And I'm going to pop up Anita's comment, which was poetry can tell a lot of stories depending on who reads it. And I think each story is different to the reader. And that's what's unique about poetry is when you're writing a book, you're kind of saying, this is the story. When you're writing poetry, it allows the reader to determine what that story is behind the poetry. Yeah. But what I was going to say is, yes, I'm an underwriter too. I was actually just finished a book. And when I was doing the first draft, I said, I posted about it and I said, oh, and now, at this word count, and by the time I'm done, I'll be at and it was a higher word count. I should be around there because I know myself and I know what I'm going to add in. And someone said, oh, that's interesting. Because Stephen King says you're supposed to write this and then cut like 30%. And I thought, that's insane, because I'm not that kind of writer. But yeah, for me, it's I want to get just the idea out and get the kind of bones out and then go in and build it up from there. I can't imagine writing stuff I cut. I just can't. Like, that's just not how I write.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you have these, you said you have these, you're working on, what are some of the other books you've written? Because you said you have books that you've written in between, correct?
Yeah. So I have a collection of short stories called Enchantress of Books. I have a romance novel called The Impossible Guy. And my last book was an alternate history called The New Empire. So I do jump around from genre to genre, and I have hundreds of short stories and poems published as well in different magazines and journals.
Yeah.
So
I jump around too. I always say whatever shape pops in my head, that's what I'm running with. But what's the one that's the alternate history? I'm really curious about that one.
The New Empire is actually set in the 1700s. And the what if question that it asks is, what if the Chinese Empire had arrived in the Americas several centuries before the Europeans? How would that have changed history? And I imagine that it would have changed it quite a bit.
I don't think so.
Yeah. And the background of my story is that the indigenous peoples had grouped together and with the technology of the Chinese Empire behind them, had become a world superpower on their own. So by the time the Europeans come, they're facing some stiff opposition for them trying to take over.
Wow. And what inspired that? That's really fascinating.
Oh, definitely it came from real life. So I was reading an article maybe a decade ago, I don't remember when it came out, about how there was some archaeological evidence that the Chinese had sent ships and and had landed in South America. So they didn't continue their exploration and they never stayed, but it would have been interesting to see if they had, what would have happened.
And is that YA or is that adult or how's that written?
That's adult. Yeah.
Okay.
They're, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. See, I like I like alternative history if it really kind of explores, you know, beyond, okay, this just happened, but really explores the positive and negatives of that change, and how that would really affect everything, kind of like the butterfly effect, but, you know, broader. So that's a really fascinating story. I might have to check that one out. That's kind of
Oh,
like
definitely.
the type of stuff I like to read. So a question I like to always ask, because you've obviously written now and you have quite a bit under your belt, is if a new writer approached you, and they're a first-time writer and they are struggling with, and I'd say really get into the bones of it, they're really struggling with forming a story. What is advice that you would give to them to help them move forward?
Oh, I have lots of advice for this because I've actually worked with authors who have been in this exact situation. Um, Sometimes I find that going back to the idea of ghostwriting, some people can't just sit down at a computer and start typing. It's not natural to them. So oftentimes the first thing I will suggest is maybe, depending on how you're trying to get the story out, maybe it's the wrong way to get the story out. And especially for people who are great talkers and just really like other people, I often say the best thing to do is just to tell this story as if you're telling it to another person. Say it out loud, record
Yeah.
yourself. Find some transcription software to get it all down because it will preserve your voice, it will preserve the story, and it will make you comfortable because a blank page can be very intimidating if you don't feel like you're a writer. But also finding your peer group. Sometimes it can be as simple as encouragement, finding a writing group that supports you, finding a writing group that is bugging you for the next chapter in your work because they want to find out how the story turns out. But a lot of it is just sort of changing your mindset because the story is the same, however you get it out. It's just making sure that you have that support system, that you know how the best way to write it down is. And sometimes it's not writing at all.
That is true. Yeah, I find inspiration, and I don't really get writer's block per se, but I do get sometimes where I'm like, I really don't know kind of which direction I'm going to go, or maybe I'm just not feeling it. And I find music helps her. You know, watching a program that's not even completely related helps me because it helps like tap into a creativity, and then I'm able to get through that and then go a different direction. But here's a question. So do you plot or do you pant? Like, are you a plotter or a panther?
I have to say I've done both. So the Rose Queen was pantsed because I knew the fairy tale really well and it was something very close to me and I knew exactly how I was going to change the story. But at the same time, I didn't have an outline. I didn't have a character sketch. I didn't have any of that. I just sat down and wrote every day. But I found that a bit inefficient because I would write myself into corners. I'd
Yes.
have to think about things like I would take breaks. And over time, especially with ghostwriting, you have to turn in an outline to your client. You have to make sure that you know where you're going. You can't just go off on tangents. So over time, I became a plotter, and now I'm solidly in the plotting territory. And I like to know exactly where I'm going. Before I start a book, I have chapter by chapter outlines. I have character sketches. I will
Oh,
do my
wow.
research. I will have pages and pages, like of pre-writing, I would say, before I actually sit down and write. But it saves time. To me, it's whether you want to spend more time editing afterwards or preparing beforehand. And I would just rather prepare beforehand and get it out and then spend less time afterwards fixing things.
Does your story ever decide that it's going to change that? Like, will you have the idea and then you're writing it and all of a sudden the story is like, nah, we're going a different direction?
Not so much. I might go off on little tangents, because again, I'm an underwriter, so I basically, add things later on.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I like to work out a lot of the kinks in the outline stage. I will actually, and this is something that again, writing groups can be good for more than encouragement. They can also be good for helping you work out the kinks too. So I will often, if I'm stuck on something in the outline stage, I will just bring my outline to my writing group and be like, poke holes in this, find the plot holes, help me fix this part seems weak. Can you help me fix this? And they do. It's fabulous. Like you get a room full of writers, they will throw a million ideas at you.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So let's talk outlines a little bit, because as I'm pretty much a dedicated pantser. I will, I seem like a plantser because I do a lot of research. So my research a lot of times becomes like that part of that outline, because I know that I want to weave in, like, I was a journalist first, so I tend to like go to research all the time. So that's the only part that I really kind of have down, is that information. But like when you're doing an outline for, say, a novel, how deep do you dig into that outline? Like, what are you really including in that before you actually start writing the story?
Well, again, it's several layers. So, the way that I start my story idea, normally I start with a log line, which is basically just, who's the protagonist, who's the antagonist, what's the conflict. And then I'll usually expand that to like a paragraph, sort of like what you would read on the back of a book that sort of gives the main points. And then I expand it to chapter by chapter. And as I'm writing the chapter by chapter outline, I'm at the same time doing my character sketch. So like if I'm writing, I'm like, oh, she's faced with like a bear's chasing her. I'll be like, and then I'll go to my character sketch and be like, afraid of bears.
Yeah.
So I sort of do those concurrently. But yeah, so I really do. Every chapter has a paragraph at least of what I'm planning on writing. So I can get quite detailed about it before I actually sit down and write.
Yeah, that's really, it's interesting because I don't do that. So like mine is so much more like, out there.
Yeah, but it's sort of like what we were talking about, how like you have to find your way into, if you're blocked, it's probably not the story itself, it's probably the method in some way. So I met, like again, I started out as a pantser, it didn't really work for me, so I changed. So sometimes you just have to find what works best for your own particular, because writing is such an individual task. It's like there's no one right way to do it. So you just have to find your way.
Yes. And I say that all the time because I really despise when people are like, well, you should do this to write. And I actually teach writing classes. I'm a librarian too, and I teach a writer's workshop. And the one thing I would say is like, look, what I'm telling you is how it works for me. Find your way. But it really like makes me cringe when people are like, well, the only way you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do it this way, A, B, or C. Like,
oh yeah,
it does not work for everybody. And what happens is a lot of writers get kind of scared off because they're like, oh, I can't do it that way, and maybe I'm not doing it right. So I say, check out the rules, figure out what works for you. And yeah, but it definitely works for you. It sounds like with your outlines, keeping you on track and doing that. How much research do you do? Like, so I know you write a little more fantasy, correct? I know you're cross genre, but you lean towards fantasy. So how much research do you do prior to writing?
It depends how much history I want to throw into something.
Yeah.
Again, the Rose Queen was very sort of historically based. So I did do a lot of research for that. But because I was pantsing, I was sort of doing research as I went. So I would be like, okay, today I'm going to write a chapter in my book. And then I would get stuck on a particular point, like, I wonder if hawthorn is the right medicine for this illness or something. And so then I would spend all day just researching. And I didn't find that very efficient.
Yeah. I go down rabbit holes. Yeah.
Exactly. The rabbit holes. I mean, and you can still do that if you outline, But yeah, I tend to do a lot of research when it comes to things like that. I also write, for example, science fiction, which requires a lot of research, because if you get one technical thing wrong, you will have 50 people writing to you and saying,
yes, you
will. Wrong.
That's not right.
Exactly. So, but yeah, so each genre also has its own methods to it. So like, for example, trying to write a Western, like with fantasy tropes, doesn't always work out well unless you're doing it intentionally, or trying to write, science fiction with romance tropes doesn't work unless you're deliberately trying to do the cross genre thing.
Yeah.
So it's important to also know, especially if you write in multiple genres, know the tropes, know the expectations of your reader, and all of that requires research, of course.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think people don't really think about research as factual research. I need to get these facts for my story. But I think that's really important to know, researching your readers and researching the genre to make sure that you are I mean, because people are pretty committed and dedicated to their genres. Like, you don't want to piss them off. So, so yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I don't think a lot of people think about that, is to say, okay, if I'm writing, romantasy, it's different than if I'm writing sci-fi. What people expect out of both of those is completely different. And you really have to make sure you know what you're doing within both of those.
That's true. And honestly, that sort of comes to another point. If you are writing more than one genre, or even if you're just writing one genre, you should be widely read in that genre.
Yes.
Because if you aren't, then you will probably make a lot of beginner mistakes. But if you're very familiar with it, if you're comfortable with it, if you know the different tropes of each genre, then you're more into it. You're more in that world, and you can more comfortably write it, whether you're a pantser or a plotter.
I agree. I think that's a really valid point. And then Anita says, I find even as a plotter, you have to do research as you go when you're writing history. So obviously you have what you've initially done, but you may have to still do some more research on that, which, I think that's definitely true. I think research, for me, at least, research is kind of always ongoing, because you're like, even as you're building and you start out with, okay, I'm going to do this. And then some little detail comes up and you go, oh, shoot, let me do some more research to make sure that's accurate.
That's true.
So you write multiple genres. Is there any particular genre you lean more towards or enjoy writing more?
So one thing that I do, because I write both serious stuff and silly stuff, it's less a genre that I lean towards as a tone. So I like to sort of cleanse my palette. So if I write something really serious and heavy, my next work will probably be way lighter, lighthearted. So it doesn't really matter genre as much. Although I do like to switch it up with genre too. But yeah, I do love fantasy a lot. I grew up reading that more than any other genre. So that's sort of my go-to. If I'm put on the spot to write a story, like right now, I would probably pick a fantasy story. But I love all genres: romance, science fiction. I don't know. I can't think of a genre I haven't written at this point.
So I'm similar in that I write a lot of genres, and I even do kind of blending of genres. And so here, like in blending a genre, so if you're writing a story and you're blending a genre, and we talked about that, you have different kind of expectations for romance readers versus sci-fi readers. So when you're blending, say you're blending sci-fi and you're blending romance, how do you make sure that you're going to appeal to both and not alienate either?
I would really want to explore where I'm going to place that book, I would say. As you mentioned before, romantasy, for example. It does appeal to both readers of romance and fantasy, because there's a lot of crossover. So finding the way into reaching those readers is very important, I think. The pissing off readers can be easy if you make, again, newbie mistakes. So if you focus too much on one genre over the other, like if you're focusing a lot on romance and you do a lot of hand wavy science fiction stuff, you'll probably piss off your science fiction readers. So you really want to make sure that the story feels complete in both genres. Like if you're just reading it from the science fiction perspective and ignoring the romance, does it feel complete? Does it feel realistic? Is every bolt in the right place on that spaceship? So making sure that it will feel complete to each genre reader, I think is the way that I go.
And I will say, you're still going to piss some people off. I write horror, and so one of my horror, I also had some romance, and it's a good balance. And for most people, it's fine. But there are people that are diehard, do not put romance in my horror books. So you also have to learn that you can't please everybody. But
that's true.
But it is interesting trying to really balance the two and make sure that you are kind of appreciating both genres. And finding those readers that can as well, that can appreciate, that I like romance, but I like sci-fi, and that both are balanced equally so that they feel like they're getting what they wanted out of that story. And it is a challenge. I think that, there's a lot of, at least for me, appreciation people that do kind of blended genres, because it's a lot harder than just picking one and rolling with it.
Yeah, and I sort of see blended genres as sort of a gateway drug, I think, for readers, because let's say you have a reader who only reads science fiction and has never read romance. If you rate a sci-fi romance and they enjoy it, they might be more likely the next time to pick up a romance book. So like it really is like a gateway drug. You can lead readers on a different path and make them realize, hey, maybe there's a good story over here too. So I don't know. I love cross genre stuff. I think it's so much fun.
I do too. And it's funny because, like, I been reading my whole life. And like when I was younger and I would pick up a book, for the most part, it was just a book. Like it wasn't, unless it was like a die-hard sci-fi or like a die-hard romance, but most books kind of had elements of all of it. And then, more lately, I felt like I've seen more of that splitting of genres where like, oh, I only read this type of horror. I only read romance, and like kind of the separation. And so I really do love finding writers who can do both of it, because I still enjoy just having a good story, a story that has a little bit of horror, a little bit of romance, a little bit, whatever sci-fi, like just bring it in, because to me, it's just about the story, not about the genre. But that being said, it's really hard to market that. And it's hard, and say we talked about awards earlier, finding awards when you go to pick a category, you go, oh, what category would I pick? Do you find a challenge with that? And how do you kind of broach that?
One way is to pick all the categories. That's
true.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of times it can be, you can focus it on a particular genre. So if it's cross genre, you can say, oh, right now, like I've heard a lot back from fantasy readers for my book.
Right.
So I'm going to really lean into the fantasy aspects of the book rather than the romance aspects of the book. So I usually let readers lead me in a little ways. So for example, my alternate history also has a little bit of fantasy elements to it. But it's alternate history. That's what people enjoyed it for. So that is more of what I lean into for that. So yeah, you can definitely alter it. A lot of the marketing categories, honestly, are just to sell the book, and it doesn't necessarily uh capture the story. I would say there's more cross genre stuff than we talk about, just because again, you have to put the book somewhere on a bookshelf
Right.
for people to buy. So you limiting yourself is sometimes good to sell the book, but it might not exactly describe what's in the book.
Sure. Yeah. I have a friend, I'm always like, she reads all my books, and I'll be like, okay, what category would you put this in? Because I need to know so I can put it in this category for an award or for whatever. And she's always like, I think that, but it is tough. But I love a book that can cross a lot of those. But you're right. I think your reader is going to be the person who's going to let you know really where it fits best.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're getting close to being done here. So I'm going to have you let the listeners know what you have upcoming, like if you have any release dates or what you're working on, if you have any events that you're doing, and again, if you have a website or places that they can find you.
Yeah, so I generally, since we're coming to the end of the year, it's sort of past a lot of the literary conventions that I tend to attend. Next year, I will be probably speaking at a number of conventions in my area. I'm up in Alberta in Canada, so if you are here, please look me up. All the information will be on my website, which is AlisonMcBain.com. Again, Alison with one L. There's a lot of Alisons with two L's. And nope, just one for me. But yeah, I don't currently have any releases coming out, but I do have a number of books that are being shopped around, shall I say. So you never know. You never know what's on the horizon.
And other than your website, people can find your books on, I'm assuming, like Amazon, Books A Million, things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And also local libraries, and yeah, some in-person bookstores. You never know.
Yeah, very good. And I guess you're in Canada. Is your stuff pretty widely available in the U.S. as well?
Yeah, I'm actually a dual citizen, and so I've lived in the U.S. and Canada. So my last publisher was based in Connecticut, so they definitely have the books available in the U.S. too.
Very good. Very good. Well, I really appreciate you coming on tonight. It's been a delight to talk to you and learn more about your stories. And hopefully we'll circle up in different areas as well. And for everybody that has tuned in, we appreciate you tuning in tonight. And just a reminder to let us know how we're doing here at Go Indie Now. Every time you contribute, get entered into our season-ending gift card package. You can win anything from an Amazon gift card or Bandcamp gift card, some different things there as well. And so we appreciate you, tuning in and supporting us here at Go Indie Now. And just as a reminder, it's always time to go indie now.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.